Tēnā koroa, Lil O'Brien and Kathryn Van Beek. So lovely to have you in my whare, in my home. Thank you for stopping off on your whirlwind book launch tour. Can I ask, how did it go in Wellington last night when Otherhood was kind of birthed out into the world?
It was beyond our expectations, wasn't it, Lil? The venue was packed, people cried, we almost sold out of books.
Yeah.
People were running around trying to collect all the autographs from all the contributors and the editors.
Yeah.
We had a pink cocktail. It was amazing.
It was a terrible cocktail. It tasted terrible, but it was really strong, and it was pink, so it was good. And I think it's nice to have those moments because, you know, especially in the madness leading up to the launch, you just do this. Have we got this? To kind of take a moment and also have so many of the contributors there, who most of whom we haven't met, to have them there and see how stoked they were.
Lil is a party planner extraordinaire, so she's made all these little Otherhood badges for the contributors. So when they came in, we gave them each a badge so they could see each other and talk to each other, and people could ask to have their books signed. And it was really nice seeing them all form friendships between themselves.
Yeah, they didn't actually do that because they're introverted writers until we forced them all on the stage for a photo.
That's so good.
And then when they were kind of all plopped there, they slowly started talking to each other, and it was a really nice moment. Yeah.
And for those of you watching online or on YouTube, this is the book. It's beautiful, Otherhood. And if you're ever searching for, like this is me, I go, I'm going to make some notes for my interview with Kathryn and Lil. And so I write Otherhood, and it autocorrects to motherhood. And that, in essence, kind of encapsulates a little bit about what this is all about.
There is one essay in there, How Not to Be a Mother, that talks exactly about that, how you're always, as someone who is a woman or femme, always exists in relationship to mothers.
We also had a bit of an internal situation between the three of us. The title started off with an apostrophe in front of the O. And I was like, this is so smart. It's like M is missing, like there's something missing, but we're saying there's not something missing. And then I was like, we're getting matching tattoos, and I thought everyone was on board with the matching tattoos and the apostrophe. And then it wasn't until our publisher said, look, I'm really sorry, but we might have to drop the apostrophe because it's just too hard to search, that the other two were like, oh, we didn't like the apostrophe. And I was like, have I been running rampant? Have I been bullying you two into the apostrophe?
I had a feeling the apostrophe wasn't going to make it to the end because it's too hard for a URL. So I had a feeling it was going to drop off at some point. So I wasn't too worried about it.
And can I say Otherhood is it's a profoundly good title. It captures something, doesn't it? And this is what, in essence, the three of you, along with Ali, have collected 36 essays. And they speak to being childless, child-free and child-adjacent. They speak to a community of people who perhaps haven't had a voice. What was, for you personally, what was the driver in? I mean, I know I've heard the genesis story, how you found each other on Twitter and were like, somebody should do this book. And then you were like, oh, okay, it's us. If somebody's going to do it, we're going to do it. But what were you hoping for this project?
I think I have to be honest that when I put myself into a project, I become pretty single-minded, and I have to be. I'm not much of a multitasker, and it often starts with myself. And this was the case. I think I had subconsciously been looking for a time that it would be right to write down my own experience with a fertility journey, and I hadn't had the chance, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for that. And so when that Twitter conversation happened, I was like, this is the time. But it's also a great opportunity because very quickly we realised how many people had experienced something that would be relevant, and that became larger than myself. Yeah.
I think it's been a bit of a surprise in a way how much it has resonated all the way through, from when we opened submissions and we got this flood, and then when we started the boosted crowdfunding campaign, and again there was a flood. And even last night at the Wellington launch, one of the contributors arrived and she brought her friend, and she'd said, oh, this is one of the others. So it's a concept that's really grown and resonated with people.
I think people feel on the outside, everyone is an other in some way.
It's true.
So it's kind of a way to bring people together in that sense and give them a sense of belonging in a place to feel seen, even though the stories in the anthology are very different across the board.
Yeah. Again, going back to the genesis of the book, I think it was Rick Rubin or somebody like him who said, we make the art we need. That's the job. We have to make art we need. And if he didn't say that, he said, my art is a diary. It's a journal entry. And his exhortation was, this is the art we can and perhaps ought to make. And that's why I make grey areas. I make grey areas because it's the podcast I need. I need company on my journey into aging, into the wisdom years, through menopause, with decisions about what to do with my life. And so I see that in Otherhood. Can you tell me when you, Lil, were thinking, I ought to write an essay, but I'm not sure if I'm ready yet, like how you came to be ready, or a bit more of your story, I guess?
Well, I think because I had, in some ways, a traditional failed fertility journey, and in some ways a non-traditional failed fertility journey. And it's traditional in that it involves a lot of the details that anyone who's been through IVF would be very familiar with. You know, the progesterone shots and the timing your cycle and time of day, and did you miss a shot, and how's your, you know, is the lining of your womb growing to the right, you know, thickness, and all those kinds of things. And you're so in those moments when you're going through that fertility stuff, like it's your world, even though you don't want it to be, even if you're trying to be chill about it and you're like, if it works, it works. It's so much, like, it's such a huge part of your life. And I think when you stop, it's gone. And even though sometimes it's a relief and sometimes it's the beginning of a big grief and having to let go of something that you may have really wanted, it is something that's gone. But it's also something you can't talk about with anyone else. Just how horrific it actually was. I think, you know, similar with pregnancy, I think people don't really talk about how horrific birth and pregnancy is, except for amongst themselves, possibly. But people, I don't know if they really talk about the horrors and the difficult things of a fertility journey. Maybe they do amongst themselves. But at the same time, you don't want to stay bogged down in that level of detail, and you need to, for me personally, the way I process a trauma or something that's happened in my life, I do need to write about it. And that's kind of my way of honouring and remembering what happened, even if I'm not ready to write about it at the same time. Because it's when you're adding a narrative to a story that could be very, you know, my essay about going from IUI to IVF, couple of miscarriages, you know, ultimately feeling quite freed when I stopped trying to have a baby. That could have been 5 different stories. It probably could have been a book in itself. But I often find when I start writing about it, when I put a narrative, that's when I begin thinking of the person who's going to be reading it, and thinking what they're going to be taking of it, and what I want to share about. For me as a writer, there's always humour in whatever I do. I can't help it. And so I do find that I write the humour. And so I don't know, I guess it just felt like I was ready to be able to joke about the hilarious parts of the journey as well as the bad parts.
And your one's called, I think, No Masturbation Allowed,
yes,
isn't it? Which is, it's a fantastically funny title, because you're like, well, what does this have to do with not getting pregnant or getting pregnant? Or and as you read the story, that's one of the requirements, isn't it? Yeah,
but that's because so I went through fertility in New York. I was living there with my wife at the time. And I've since learned that actually that's not the norm.
Not in New Zealand. I think it must be like a puritanical US thing.
It's just the bloody Americans. It's like, but you know, in America they throw everything at it. You know, they're like, because I had to come back for a period of time. We moved home from New York, and I was still had embryos in New York. So, and I was so single-minded about my pursuit of success that I knew that I was going to come back, get back on the drugs, and then fly over there to do the transfer. And so I had to have New Zealand progesterone, but they didn't have injectable progesterone in New Zealand. And so they gave me pills. And when I got back to America, they're like, oh, what? Look at your levels. They're terrible. So they're like, here's an injection plus the pills. So it was just like absolutely full on. They were like, they couldn't believe the standard of New Zealand IVF versus America. And so a part of that is that they say you can't do anything once they've done the egg transfer that might dislodge the blastocyst from the lining. And part of that is no orgasms. So I just thought that was a funny
It is funny
thing.
because like an orgasm or masturbation can be quite comforting, right? It can be like, oh, I feel terrible, but actually I can bring myself some pleasure or some joy or some comfort, and you're like, not even that, no thanks.
No, it's like that time when you're waiting to find out if it's worked. It's like honestly the worst. It's like be healthy, do exercise but nothing too much, no drinking. It's like then they take away orgasms. Like this is the patriarchy. Surely this is not right. Like
it's definitely the patriarchy. But I don't know if they ever gave them back, actually, did they? Anyway, that's another story. My husband's looking at me. Give the orgasms back. Maybe we have to take that into our own hands, actually. Okay. Okay.
He's looking quite concerned now.
He's not concerned at all. Yeah. Okay. You were actually putting yourself through a lot in this, and I heard you use the word success. You were in pursuit of success. Can you unpack that for me?
I think my relationship to success in the past had been I either did something that I knew I was going to succeed at or knew that I was good at enough to a point that I would be happy with whatever I achieved. It wasn't like necessarily a single goal, but it was like, or you try something, but you don't really mind if you fail. Whereas I'd never experienced something that I had really given everything that I could. I'd given all my money, all my energy, it was taken up my whole headspace, absolutely everything. And ultimately to realise that you're completely helpless. There's arguments to be said that you can influence some ways. Don't be stressed, eat this way, but whatever. Like, it was just, it's a game of luck in a way, and what's happening in your body that you can't control. And that was the first time I'd been really gutted by a failure. But I think by that point, because you do get so bogged down in the logistics and what you need to do next and how am I going to get back to America, that I think I'd stopped thinking about what did I actually want along the way. Like, what happens when you get to the end? If you are pregnant and you do have a child, like, of course you can't let yourself think about those things. But if you thought too much about the child at the end, then it's daring to hope, right? It feels like that would make it worse.
And so when you got to the end of all of that, and that last, is it blastocyst?
Blastocyst, yeah.
Didn't stay. Then what did you do for yourself to transition to where you are now?
I mean, it was a fairly devastating ending, like medically, physically. It was, I had to like deliver the fetus.
Yeah, because what people probably who haven't read your essay don't know is your that pregnancy took and at 18 weeks.
Basically, it was a rare syndrome. So it was like after you have good luck and you have bad luck on the journey. When you think you've had good luck, it was this real kick in the ass of bad luck. It was a rare condition that no doctor in New Zealand had seen it in the flesh, and they could have possibly made the pregnancy last. But there were two doctors in New Zealand who had done the operation before, and one was in Australia and one had injured her hand. So ultimately they had someone who'd never done it before try and separate two, like twin fetuses, and had gone on quite optimistically, and it had failed. But there was a 6-week period where I had to wait for that operation, so it was just the worst kind of waiting game. And so there was the kind of like a physical recovery from that. It was almost like what I imagine it would be after giving birth. And I was pretty emotional. I think for the first time I stopped the mental what next. And I let it go for a few months. And I think when I said to my wife after a few months, so when are we going to try again? She was just like, are you kidding me? Like, and we agreed to give it till the end of summer. And then when I said, so what are we going to do? It kind of actually opened up a whole bigger discussion about our relationship. And what ultimately the positive thing that came out of it is that when we decided that's it, we're not going to do it again, after a kind of an ill-fated toe dipped into the water of Australian fertility, I felt free when I was like, okay, we're not actually doing this. And I was just like, suddenly it was like I've been in a fog, and I was like, I actually feel bloody great that we're not doing this anymore. And then the second thought was, thank God that that's how I feel, because I suddenly had empathy for all those people that really, really, really wanted it. And when they ultimately couldn't have it, I was like, that would have been so devastating for those people. So I think ultimately I felt very lucky that that's how I felt at the end of the journey. And I just felt free from, it was like my life opened up, because I was 35, 36, and I was like, oh God, I don't have to, like, those are the danger years for women. We all know it's like the clock does start ticking at those things. You have to start making those decisions and putting plans in place. And suddenly it was gone. And yeah, so it was actually very freeing.
And when you speak about empathy, part of me wonders if this conversation and this collection of essays, this anthology, is inviting people to have more empathy for one another.
Yeah, I think there's some child-free groups out there which are amazing in many ways, on Facebook and kinds of places, but you've got such a mix of people, of, you know, child-free people that are like, down with the breeders, you know, like, woohoo, no children. And then you've got the people that I'm here because I am going through IVF and I'm trying to find some support. So you've got two actually quite different groups of people, and they're clashing. So you've got, in some cases, there are people that are like, this is a group for child-free people. Like, I don't want to hear about how you want children. And then other people go, oh God, I'm here for support. And it's interesting because I find sometimes things like that happen in the queer community that I'm a part of as well, is that some people are kind of down on people from different parts of the community because they've had it hard, or for whatever reason. I'm like, guys, this is supposed to be a supportive space. So that's absolutely the opposite of what we wanted to create with the book. It was actually, there's room for everyone, but we do demand that you respect each other's journey.
That's cool. So there's a boundary line, right?
Yes.
That respect is a requirement of belonging to that community, and that sounds realistic. And in fact, I've heard originally you thought only non-mums would be included in the anthology, but there are stories from mothers. Can you tell us about their inclusion?
There are. When we put out the call for submissions, one person wrote to us and said, I don't know if I count, but I was an egg donor, and we just thought that sounded fascinating, so we asked her to write an essay, and it was so brilliant and funny, so we've included that one. There are two stories on the other end of the emotional spectrum, which are mothers who've lost their children to suicide. And there's also Nicola Brown, who writes about her experiences with secondary infertility. So she and her wife had one child and then weren't able to conceive another one. And although she's not strictly an other, we know that people in that camp do feel very othered because they deal with that only child stigma. And people maybe who are in that childless, child-free kind of zone might think, well, you're lucky to have one child. And people who maybe had a lot of children without any problems think, well, why aren't you having more children, so they can feel quite isolated too. So it was nice to be able to include her essay.
Yeah, we kept kind of coming up. We kept having scenarios come in, or people where we'd go, are they another? Do they fit in the collection? And it kept kind of expanding. And we were kind of like, how do we define this? Like, we need to stop defining this by their demographics, I guess. I'm not sure if that's the way to say it, but how does it fit in with what we're trying to achieve here?
So you're saying you had to stop defining it by the external absence or presence of said child or non-child.
Well, we realised that the term motherhood is a grey area, because what is a mother? Lots of people in our collection have mothered. They're not necessarily biological mothers. What are you if you've had a child and that child has passed away? Are you still a mother? There's a lot of grey areas with that term.
Yeah, the story about the foster mum is such a beautiful essay. It's so profound.
Yeah.
and how she mothered many children and yet was never able to maybe fully occupy the title of mother.
That final sentence where she says, I may not have been a mother, but I was something. It's amazing.
Yeah, she spoke at our launch last night, and there was a person who'd been through the foster system in the audience, and we saw them. They were having a big old chat afterwards. And it was pretty good. But she was quite adamant that she was not a mother. She was like, don't even think about putting me in that case. Like, these are children and families that are quite possibly having the worst day of their life when they turn up on my doorstep, you know. And so I think that's kind of giving them space and not claiming that, while obviously recognising what she is doing is mothering in a sense.
And it's also that thing about not having a way to acknowledge a big event in your life, which I definitely found with miscarriage. There's no marker, and I kind of went on this journey of how to mark it, and there's this great New York Times article about someone who went to Japan and got a jitsu statue, and that's something they do in Japan, that you could mark the loss of a pregnancy that way. But we don't really have a marker here. And Melanese says she talks about how she brings a child into her house, her life changes completely, and there's no cultural or social marker that acknowledges that huge life event.
Yeah, you're so right, because if you bring a baby home from hospital or from whenever, wherever, you know, it's like this is a celebratory moment, right? But if you have a foster child coming into your home, potentially for them, there's not a celebration happening.
Yes.
At all. You know, they're escaping danger, or they're needing help and care and support outside of their own whānau. Can you tell us a little bit, Kathryn, about your story and your journey in terms of writing your essay? Could I quote a little bit of your essay?
Sure.
Is that okay? And we can decide whether we keep it or cut it out. Okay. I so loved your essay, because I kept meaning to say, I know, Lil, you mentioned, the book is funny and fun, and I've cried heaps, right? So side by side, like lots. So your essay is called I'm Not a Beach, and there's a bit here that says, because I like what you did, deconstructed the essay and made it into kind of pithy paragraphs and lists. And you said, how to cure infertility, and there's a list. Just relax. Eat pineapple. Lie with your legs up in the air after sex. Lose weight. Stop smoking. Stop drinking. Avoid caffeine. Buy some expensive powders from a naturopath. And the list goes on. And then the next paragraph is, it is important to do all these things because it is a proven fact that no overweight, stressed out, coffee drinking, pineapple avoiding smokers who failed to lie with their legs up in the air after sex have ever become pregnant. And that kind of just gives people a taste of kind of the ludicrousness of some of the situations we find ourselves in life.
Definitely, and I guess that kind of comes back to that success thing again, because I think people who haven't been through the experience of not getting something they want, that so many people seem to be able to get so easily, can't quite understand it, and that's why you do get things like, just eat some pineapple, that should sort you out. But I think we've had quite similar emotional journeys in some ways, because I think we probably both grew up pretty kind of independent girls who were maybe open to the idea of having children or not. And it was probably only when I got to a certain point in my life and met my husband that I thought, this could be really nice actually to...
Oh, you're cute.
Yeah. And so we tried to get pregnant and couldn't get pregnant, and we went through the system here, going through Fertility Associates. We had 2 rounds of IVF, and that wasn't successful. So it's the same thing. You go along and into some weird office block and sit there with your full bladder and hope you're not going to pee on the table. I asked the nurse once if anyone ever had, and it has apparently happened, because they roll the little scanner over your full bladder while you're lying on the table. And yeah, I got pregnant and had a miscarriage just before 12 weeks, and I was quite shocked because miscarriage happens in about 1 in 4 pregnancies or 1 in 5 pregnancies, but I didn't really know anyone who had ever talked about it. So I was quite surprised, which probably sounds silly and naive, particularly to someone who grew up with people who had talked openly about their miscarriages, but that hadn't been my experience. So I was unprepared for it, and we'd already kind of, put up the curtains in the baby's room, and I was kind of transitioning into, maternity clothes because of the IVF hormones, my body was just going completely crazy. It was at the point where people at work were starting to notice, and I was going to have to start having that conversation about parental leave. And then woke up. I think I woke up on my husband's birthday and thought, oh, something feels a bit different. And then when we went for our scan, I didn't say anything so I wouldn't ruin his birthday, but when we went for our scan a couple of days later, there was no heartbeat. But we had seen a heartbeat on a previous scan, but it's such a mind fuck because it was there and now it's not. And were you pregnant? Did you just make it up? What's happened? And then I had to go and have a surgery to get that removed. And then I went through 2 other miscarriages. And they're not just like a heavy period. That is also a myth. Yeah.
And I guess I want to acknowledge that you're right. Our culture doesn't have a marker. I don't know if I've told the story fully on the podcast, but we lost a baby in between or after my first child, and I remember throwing away the pregnancy test. Like I put it in the rubbish because that's as much celebration and honour as we give it, right? And I was doing a postgraduate paper, and they said it was a paper on death, grief and loss, and they're like, okay, write about something. And I'm like, oh, speaking of writing, I will write about my miscarriage. And it was good to do, because like you say, it kind of honours the journey. And I remember part of my journey was, I actually don't mind being emotional, so she says, making an excuse for it. Part of my journey was coming home one day and getting that pregnancy test out of the bin because it wasn't rubbish and it wasn't a figment of my imagination.
Yeah, it was real. It had happened.
Yeah. And I said to my husband at the time, who's still my husband, I said... I said, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to be sad tonight. We're going to have to sit in the lounge and we need to mark this occasion because this baby existed. And I don't know if it's a Czech thing or not, but I'd married that kid off. Like that kid had gone to high school and graduated and like done some shit. And so we sat in our lounge and we were sad. And I still have the pregnancy test because that child existed.
Well, it's amazing how far along you do get, even in the space of a couple of months, because your whole life, you think, is about to change. And so you're already swerving in that direction. So it's quite hard to suddenly have to kind of swerve back.
Yeah, I had, before we moved back from America, we were like, well, let's buy up large on the baby stuff while it's so cheap. And we had a shipping container coming home. So we had all the IKEA cribs and prams and cute outfits from Gap and things like that. And then
such cute outfits.
Yeah, so good. And I was like, if it's a girl, it's going to be a tomboy. I'm putting it in a jumpsuit. But then kind of each time I went back, or as the years, whenever I went into the shed where all the stuff was, kind of each time I went in there, I was a little bit further away emotionally, and I would get rid of one item at a time. Like the crib went to my friends who were having a baby, until ultimately a few years later all I had was my favourite jumpsuit from the Gap that I just didn't want to let go of. Yeah,
some of my friends got some pretty good like baby shower presents for a while there. They're like, oh, this is so good. I'm like, yeah,
it was good. It really was good. Yeah. And in your essay you name the children you lost. Was that significant for you? Was that a decision for the essay, or was it something you did at the time?
Well, as soon as you find out you're pregnant, you start figuring out what kind of names you like and creating a short list. And no, we hadn't named the fetuses, but they seem like likely names. And I guess I'm quite obsessed with alternate futures, because our lives can go down so many different paths and we just don't know. And so I guess I was imagining an alternate future for myself if things had gone in a different direction. So the kids needed names so I could write about them in the essay.
Yeah, it works really beautifully as a literary device. And they're lovely names.
Oh, thank you. They're family names.
I could tell. And how did you reconcile yourself with your alternate future?
Well, like Lil, I was lucky that I hadn't really been completely wedded to the idea of having children my whole life. But then, yeah, obviously when you're going through the process, you are, particularly once you get pregnant and you think, well, this is how things are going to go. But I think we both have very full lives, so that's definitely made things easier. And I have a great life, but I was quite surprised when I reread the essay because I'd written it not long before we had that first interaction on Twitter. And a bit of time had passed before we got down to editing the book. And I was like, whoa, Kathryn was angry when she wrote this.
She's feisty. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really, it's a beautiful emotion to capture, right? Like, I am not on a beach.
Well, I think maybe I'd started writing it after, I know my husband, after one particular Father's Day, he ended up feeling quite sad. And maybe I started writing it after that, or after a day where maybe I'd had some pretty heavy emotions about it all. Because sometimes you do feel a little bit on the outer. I guess the thing about creating a community when you're a mother, you know, I've got lots of friends who I know they see their other friends with kids way more than they see me, but simply because I'm harder to schedule in, because they naturally bump into the other friends at the school gate and at school functions and at school discos and other kid-related activities.
Like, I've written 3 words down here: stigma, awareness, and selfish. They all have different kōrero kind of attached to them. But when you talk about stigma and when you talk about, I guess, perceptions that people have of women that are childless, I guess what is it? Is there something you want the others to know, like the others who are the mothers in this case?
Well, I guess on selfish, because Lil and I both had that kind of fertility journey kind of story, but there are a lot of people in the book who are child-free by choice, and so I guess they get branded with that term selfish, which our co-editor Ali talks about very eloquently, and she has a beautiful essay about what makes a good life. And I don't know if we do think it is selfish, do we, Lil?
No, and I've always felt a little bit disconnected. Like, I don't think that I'm representative of the way a lot of people feel or have been treated, and I do think that's because I'm a queer person. And I think I am more subject to the influences of society than I thought I was. But it's a shock to me when people would say, do you have children? Or are you having children? Any of those questions. I'd be like, oh, like, why are you asking me that? Like, that's so weird. Like, I think as a queer person, it was just like when I came out, and probably for the first 10 years that I was out, we weren't able to get married. You know, so the idea that people would be going around saying, are you having children? When are you having children? Why aren't you having children? Is just, it wasn't my reality. It just is not something, even if people wanted to ask me, if they knew I was queer, they would not, because they're just worried that they're asking the wrong question or it's a complicated question. But maybe that's how they should be acting towards straight people. Maybe they should be going in with that same forethought and going, this is actually a complicated question that doesn't necessarily have a simple answer, so I should think twice about whether it's the appropriate time, whether my relationship with this person is of the kind where I should be asking those questions.
Puts you in a very difficult position when someone asks if you have kids, and you have to suddenly size this person up and think, well, how honest can I be with this person that I've only just met? Do I want to make them feel awkward? I kind of do, but that would be kind of impolite, so maybe I'll just make some kind of joke.
Yeah.
I recognise it in so much as I think singleness and child-freeness and those topics deserve airtime. They deserve to be discussed safely and wisely and helpfully and funnily. And yet, even in approaching people in the podcast, I have friends who are single and I have friends who are childless and child-free. Actually, a lot of them. My closest friend from the age of 5 married late in life and didn't feel like the world was a safe enough place, I think, to bring a child into. And so I'm aware that for years, when you know, our cohort got together, if there were several of us, she might be the only person who was child-free in that group. And how immensely boring conversation could be, or just exclusive, just didn't relate to her life. And yet she's a particularly wonderful auntie, and she's an amazing woman, and she's a writer, and she works, like she's got an interesting life, right? But I would sometimes catch myself and I'd look at her and I'd think, time for a topic change, like, let's move on, people.
I'm actually finding that at the moment that I've become boring sometimes, because I've got stepkids now. I'm not quite sure how I land on the title of label of step parent, but my partner of 4 years has got a 13 and a 17-year-old. So technically, I guess I am, or maybe not technically. Maybe you have to be married. I'm not sure. See, it's not. It's all.
It's a grey area.
It's a grey area. But and I do find myself sometimes talking about the kids, and I'm like, who am I? I've become those people. But then when I find my friends, especially my queer friends who mostly don't have children themselves, when they ask me about my kids, I'm like, oh, I'm actually very pleased that they've asked and they've remembered, and they're like, they know what's going on in their lives. And so I understand more now why parents do talk about those things. I think for me before I thought, well, it's a simple topic. It's an easy topic. You don't have to talk about the challenges you're facing, or you're not talking about politics or, all the difficult topics. It's an easy way to, have a nice time.
It's like the weather, but for parents.
But now I understand that I understand, I guess, the pride that parents have and how they want to share the way what's happening with their kid and how they're progressing and stuff. So I'm seeing the other side now, and I get it. I think it's never that's annoyed me. I think it's what really annoys me as someone who doesn't have biological children is, I think it's assumptions that really get to me. It's assumptions and being exclusionary. So when it's people and you're on the outside, you're a bit of a weirdo because you don't have kids, or like in my experience, sometimes I've felt that when I'm around lots of straight people, they're just like, they're not sure whether to include you or not because you're just a little bit of another and they're not sure. So that's what annoys me. One thing is when people are exclusive rather than inclusive, and the other thing is assuming, like my bugbear that I've talked about before is when people go, oh, my husband and I are going to have children next year or in the next 2 years. I'm like, well, you don't know that's going to happen. Like, and have some empathy, like, for the people. I mean, maybe they will go on, get pregnant first time, which is also quite annoying to be honest. Like, I'm happy for you, but I'm also very annoyed.
Makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. How come? Why? Yeah.
Well, I do get annoyed actually by that kid chat. I'm just thinking when you were talking of this workplace I worked in the staff room, and people would sit around with their cups of tea, and you want to be friends with everyone, and everyone's kind of sitting in a group exclusively talking about their children and grandchildren, like every afternoon tea time.
Yeah.
And there was just no way to join in, and just sitting there with your cup of tea by yourself, smiling at everyone's stories, feeling like, wow, like the weather would be better than this at this point after like 2 years of this, you guys.
I'm making some space. Like I feel for my bestie, right? Because but I still saw it. I was like, oh yeah, we need to pivot. We need, and it's also a season. Like there's a consuming child season, and then it feels like you pop out the end, and parents must be such a pain to deal with. Like they never finish a sentence, and they're
but parents are great when they share their kids though, because I think maybe some people think, oh, that's a bit awkward, maybe I won't. But when you get a parent who's got great kids who shares them with you, like it's really great because it is really fun to play that role of coming in, bamboozling the kids with some cool, fun things that their parents would never let them do, and then dropping them off. Like, it's great.
Yeah.
That is great. I invited him around. He's got some cute kids. And I'm gesticulating towards my producer. I even offered to babysit, but he doesn't trust me. You look after your own kids, mate. There was a Baronesses group. I've written down a note. Baronesses group.
Baronesses. So Baronesses. Yeah.
That's our WhatsApp group between the three editors.
Yeah.
It's such a twist.
We thought we were very clever when we came up with it. And it's actually, if anyone ever hacked our WhatsApp group and published, like, we'd be destroyed. Like, the bad taste jokes in there along the way. But that's what kept us going. Like, it's been 2 years of working for free.
And books make so much money. Come on.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Exactly.
Just for anyone who knows, books don't make money.
Yes.
They don't make money.
They don't make money. And so what kept us going was just like we've all developed nemesis. We each have a nemesis who's really done not necessarily anything big to us, or they may not even know we exist, but a lot of our Baronesses chat is just like plotting ways how the other two will help the other one overthrow her nemesis. It's just, we've built a really great friendship, which is pretty amazing considering we didn't know each other when the project began.
Because it turns out you two went to high school but hadn't met?
Yeah, Kathryn was 2 or 3 years
Younger.
Yeah, and I had bumped into her at a writers' festival, and
I'd said, I've read your book, Lil, it's so great.
Is that what you said?
I'm sure I'd read it by
I
then.
recognised your face because I'm quite good with faces, and your whole family was at the school, and so I'd said hi to you, and you'd adored me, which I'd forgotten. It's just so hard to remember all the fans.
All the adoring fans. Because you've written children's books.
I have written 2 children's books, yeah. It's a long story, but I ended up with an internet famous cat, so I wrote 2 books about the cat.
Has it paid off? Did you get paid for that work? Has it worked out?
Well, a bit like this book, I crowdfunded for it. But it's definitely paid off because it was just a really fun project. And now I get to go to schools and read the book. And I've got this, I take a cat box with me.
Oh, so good.
And I pretend there's something rustling inside it. And I pull out my toy cat that I got specially made.
Oh, that's so cute. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's been really great.
Yeah.
So you are the 3 Baronesses. And look, even in talking to you, so this is a 2-year passion project. And it feels like there could be another one. Is it too soon? Is it too soon? This is what people say. Are you going to have another one?
Yeah, it does kind of feel that way. I know.
Because you said that you were going to have 30 essays, but it ended up being 36. And Lil, sometimes you lie in bed awake at night thinking about the essays that weren't included.
Well, I think about, I hate letting people down, and I think we've all got at least one essay where we're just devastated that we couldn't put it in the book. And I think is it Ellie's favourite essay that was submitted is not in the book.
Oh.
And that was because I think it was slightly off topic. Like if we had more room, it would have been in there. And for me, it was like someone who's become a dear friend to me, who I asked to write the essay.
And it was a beautiful essay.
And it was a gorgeous, gorgeous essay. But I felt like it was, and it was about her relationship with her partner and their future hopes and dreams. For that I felt like it was her imagining her future child. She was leaning towards the mother more than the other, and I'm like, I love this, but we had to be so brutal with how we cut things, and so yeah, we've all got at least one essay that we wish we could put in.
And I think we've all thought of different angles on this that haven't been captured in this book that could be captured in another book.
It feels like you might write a different essay now, Lil. Like your next essay on Otherhood could be different.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to say. I'm not sure if I would. I don't think I would write, but I don't think I would write another essay on this topic. Yeah. I think there was. I tend to write things. I've got like a 5-year lag, and on what I write about in my life. So I think I'd probably write about, who knows. I did say to the others the other day that the next book would be mothers, and it would be the relationship of the writers to their mothers. For me, that's the most complex relationship in my life. So,
and it's come up in quite a few of the essays as well, which is interesting.
Yeah.
It is a complex relationship. So who is this book for? Who needs this book?
Well, we kind of think everyone, obviously anyone who thinks they might be an other, but we think there are so many different stories in there that anyone could probably pick it up and find something they relate to or learn something new that helps them relate to people in their lives in a different way.
I think everyone is touched by the pressure to have children, like any gender, any age. It's actually present. You might not be feeling it right now, but it is there, or someone. I think one thing that we found putting the collection together was we talk about Helen Rickaby's essay, and in it she talks about how she was flagging when she was writing the essay, and she ran into an older friend of hers at a party, and the friend said, "Oh no, you must finish the essay. Women must know that there is a choice." And I think that's kind of what one thing that the book is a gift to people is that it's people, and the people in the collection have lived such crazy lives. They've done so many things. Not all of them are even related to motherhood, but they have just had these fulfilling lives, meaningful lives, rich relationships in all kinds of ways. And I think it's just maybe sometimes you need to see it in front of you. It's like representation, right? we need representation. I think some people will read the book and go, I actually hadn't ever thought about that I could do things this way.
Yeah. And we do have a choice. But I think you're right. So often the sea we're swimming in, we can't see it. It's like we're in it, right? We're a goldfish in the water, and so we don't see perhaps the societal and cultural pressures on us necessarily. Yeah. Do you think has there something about healing, because a lot of these stories are tender and hard and heavy and poignant and powerful? Do you think there's something about writing that is perhaps healing?
I was struggling after my first miscarriage in particular because it was such a shock. And I went to see a counsellor, and she said, not knowing anything about my background, well, maybe it would be a good idea to kind of write about this. And I was like, of course it's a good idea. Why haven't I done that? And that's not this essay, that's other writing I did. But writing for me is definitely very healing. It helps you process things. Writing is thinking. It's a way of crystallizing your thinking. And a lot of writers talk about this, don't they? That they write to find out what they think. And that's definitely true for me.
Yeah, I think sometimes you are writing too early. I think write, you know. But you might not know what you think just then. But I always say to people, write it down how you're feeling, because it's amazing what you forget, and you go back, I forgot that I was feeling that way. But I do think there's a number of the writers in the collection who this is definitely the first time they've written about those experiences. And I know that there were a lot of tears shed by the writers as they were writing. And even last night, sorry to bring it up, Ellie, but she got on stage and her essays about being a child-free dink, you know, travelling around the world.
No kids.
But she was reading a passage about imagining if she had a child with her partner, and she teared up. So the emotion is close to the surface no matter where you fall on the decision tree.
Yeah.
And I think reading it will be healing for people as well, because these topics that don't get talked about, all the topics that you cover in grey areas, you can feel so alone. And so knowing that someone else has gone through a similar experience just makes you feel so much better, because when you feel alone, that's when that shame sets in and all those terrible feelings. And it's just so good to know that you're not the only person who has been through things like this.
You're absolutely right. Because I think if we feel like we're alone, one of the first questions is, what's wrong with me? Like, what have I done? What haven't I done? What should I have done? What's wrong with me? And we're not broken. You know what I mean? But we do live challenging lives. We all face challenges, and they're different. They have different shapes and textures. And I think that what you've created here with Otherhood is a space for people to show up as themselves. And I don't have to love every essay or agree with every perspective, but I actually truly I've just loved it. I've loved reading it and having an insight into other people's worlds and into their joys and journeys and their pain. It's profoundly, it's a gift. Yeah, so thank you for this passion project that you have worked on for free for 2 years, and I hope it sells truckloads. Okay, I'm going to ask you both a question I ask all my guests, and it's, what do you think that your 80-year-old self would say to you today?
I think mine would definitely say, remember to do your exercises the physiotherapist gave you. Don't stop doing those.
What else would she say?
I don't know what she would say, but I hope that she would say, oh, I can't wait to see what friends I'm going to make next. You know, for me, like, friendships have always been like the primary,
That's good, yeah.
You know, friendships have always been like my family and my primary, almost like my markers of success, and how I reflect who I am back at myself through all my friends.
Yeah.
And I make a lot of friends, and I like to think that when I'm 80, I will be looking back at all the richness that those friends brought, and that there will be more to come.
That's beautiful.
Damn you, Petra.
I would say I was sorry, but I'm not.
Well, damn you, Lil, because obviously I can't follow that. But
Back to the pelvic floor exercise. Oh, you didn't say pelvic.
I should throw those in as well. But probably something along those lines of, this is a time in life when I think people are working hard, aren't they? They've got their jobs and they've got their caring responsibilities and they've got their 2-year unpaid passion projects. And I think it is about remember to make time for those friendships and to celebrate all the small wins along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Buy the book. We'll get it out of the library near you.
Yeah.
Hey, Kathryn and Lil, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming and sharing of yourselves and your journeys and this incredible passion project.
Thanks for having us. It's been amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.